Oh, hey, I didn't see you there. I was just admiring this here yuzu fruit on this yuzu tree in this yuzu orchard, or as we like to call them in Korea, yuja. It's currently October as I'm filming this, which means we're coming near to the season for yuja to be ready to harvest. And as you can see, they're starting to turn yellow. But there is something we can make out of these yuja fruit before they ripen completely. So I'm gonna make Yuzu Kosho, which is a fermented yuzu and chili paste out of green, unripe yuzu fruit. And then once I've done that, I'm gonna show you how you can make sort of a version at home if you don't have access to yuzu fruit, because honestly, these are probably one of the hardest citrus to get a hold of if you don't live in an area like this where I live, where these grow everywhere around you. And just for context, the area of Korea that I live in down on the south coast is famous for growing yuja fruit. So I'm in the village where I live, and there's a cafe here called the Yuja Cafe, which, you know, I'm friendly with the owner because she's my neighbor, and she let me film in here today. So it's honestly a privilege to be able to film in an orchard full of yuja. Especially, like, look how good these look. Look at them. All these cats that you see running around as well, she rescues them and takes care of them, and sometimes adopts them out. But a lot of the patrons come here to play with the cats and drink coffee and have yuja flavored drinks. This guy is the latest rescue. Just a week ago, he had a whole bandage around his head. Her name is Potato. Don't ask me why. Definitely, if you're ever in the area, come check out Yuja Cafe. I'll put a link with the NAVER Maps link in the description because I don't think this place is on Google Maps. So I know I just spent all that time recording that intro in an actual yuja orchard with unripe yuja right there, but my neighbor doesn't really sell her fruit unripe, but it's not a problem because the internet exists and I was able to find a farm in another famous yuja growing region that sells their unripe yuja. So I put in my order, and a day later this little box arrived, and I haven't been this impressed with packaging for a while. There wasn't a single piece of plastic to be seen. Even the box was locked shut through like just origami. And then the actual fruit came in this nice little cotton mesh bag, which was also completely reusable. So with my fruit looking good, I first wanted to give them a good wash. I didn't use any detergents, only a fairly stiff bristle brush to clean the outside of the fruit. Now there's a couple different ways we go about this next step. You can use a microplane to grate the rind off the outside of the fruit, or what I like to do is to use a good fruit peeler to peel the rind off the outside. I found this to be faster, although you do get a little more of the white pith as well. I'll work through all my green yuzu fruit, peeling off all the rind, and just collect it all in a bowl and set it aside for now. Because next we need to cut and de-seed all our chilies. I'm using green spicy chilies. These are pretty common in Korea. They're about as spicy as a jalapeno, but are less juicy and have a bit more of a peppery, fruity vegetal flavor. So after giving those chilies a quick rinse, I'll cut the stems off and then I'll slice them down the middle. And then I'll glove up and use my hands to remove the seeds along with the pith inside. So you can leave them all in if you want, but it could add some unwanted bitter notes to the final product. Now, if you have a food processor, this is where you're gonna wanna use it. And if you don't have a food processor, have fun doing this by hand. So I've placed my food processor bowl on a scale and I'm gonna add all my yuzu rinds. And then I'll add the same weight as the yuzu rinds in the chili peppers I just cut up and de-seeded. So I'm trying to do about a 1-to-1 ratio because yuzu is cheap for me, but you can also do a higher chili ratio too. I'm gonna blitz that all up in my food processor a few times, which kind of got it fairly finely chopped up. But to get it that little bit finer, I grabbed a large cutting board, dumped my yuzu peel and chili out, and then went to town on it with a nice sharp knife, which is probably more akin to what would have been done traditionally. I'm gonna measure out my 20% of the weight of my chili and yuzu peels in sea salt. And then throw everything into a mortar and pestle, and then just start pounding away to get that salt nice and incorporated into the yuzu chili. I found using a mortar and pestle is much better than just mixing because it helps release some more of that juice which dissolves the salt into the mixture. Once I'm sure most of the salt is dissolved, I'm transferring that to a glass container, which for this I've thoroughly cleaned and dried. And even just in case, I've disinfected it as well. I'm gonna tap that jar down and press everything down to really get as much of the air out of the Yuzu Kosho as possible. And then I made this little parchment paper circle to press down onto the surface of the Yuzu Kosho to minimize air contact and to just give this the best chance of not going bad or growing any mold. So I'll close that jar up and set that aside on the counter to start fermenting, which in this case will be slow with the amount of salt that's in this. But as a result of all that salt, this will have a fairly long shelf life too. Now, like I mentioned at the beginning of this video, there's gonna be a large majority of you guys that won't be able to get a hold of Yuja or even the little green chilies for this Yuzu Kosho. So I wanted to see if using quote unquote regular citrus and green jalapenos would work as sort of a bootleg Yuzu Kosho or a citrus kosho maybe. And the process is essentially the same. I kind of randomly settled on 3 lemons, 1 lime, and 1 orange for this version, along with some fresh green jalapenos, which I've already gone ahead and washed. And then I've scrubbed the citrus pretty thoroughly because unlike the Yuja, which are local and uncoated, these import citrus most likely have a coating of wax on them, which won't really come off with just a quick rinse. So with everything washed, I'll peel all the zest off the citrus fruit and set those aside in a bowl and then cut the stems, then halve the jalapenos and push out all the seeds and pith. And immediately I can see that jalapenos are far thicker and juicier than the chilies I used for my classic Yuzu Kosho. But how that'll affect the final results, we shall see. I'll throw the zest in my food processor and then add the same weight in jalapenos and then just blend it just like before. Now this one came out at a bit better consistency than my Yuzu Kosho straight out of the food processor. Maybe because of the extra juiciness of the jalapenos. So I didn't bother going to town on it with a knife. Instead, this is gonna go straight into a mortar and pestle with 20% of its weight in sea salt. And then I'm taking this to Pound Town to dissolve the salt into the paste. Then it goes into its own little glass jar with its own little parchment paper to push it down. And I'll set that down at room temperature with the Yuzu Kosho. I could go ahead and let this ferment for as long as I want, but then who knows when this video will come out. But it just so happened to be that I was headed to Tokyo for a long weekend, and with it coinciding with me making this Yuzu Kosho, I decided to make it sort of like a mini side mission to find some authentic Japanese store-bought Yuzu Kosho to compare to my homemade Yuzu Kosho and also the citrus Kosho. So I figured why not just let my Koshos ferment until I get back from Japan. I missed my flight to Japan, so I didn't go. But it turns out you can basically order proper Japanese Yuzu Kosho online here in Korea for not too expensive. And it came the next day. So I ordered some Japanese Yuzu Kosho to try and compare to my Yuzu Kosho. Let's open this up. Let's give it a taste. Not super pretty, although it is pretty much a very similar color to mine. The smell isn't like super vibrant anymore on this one. It smells like fermented chili if you've ever smelled fermented chili. That is very salty, but a lot more spicy than citrusy, which is surprising because it says here it's 73% yuzu and then 15% chili. But this feels like it's mostly chili. That's my baseline. That's what I've got to beat. Actually, the color is pretty much the same. Mine is a bit more chunky though, for sure. We'll just grab a tiny bit there and we'll try that. I feel like mine is saltier, but it's not as funky with the chili, like I said, with the fermented chili taste. Mine still has a lot more of that citrusy freshness to it still. And it's, yeah, a bit more firm still. Like actually, personally, I do prefer mine, which is probably like no surprise because generally when you make something at home, it tastes better when you use better ingredients too. So I'll say I have the win on that one. But the real question is, I wanted to see whether our citrus Kosho can even compare to like any of these, or if it actually could be better. So let's try that one as well. The color is so much lighter and the smell is so much more zesty. If you ever smelled salted lemon, that's kind of like the smell that's coming from here. I suspect though that this top color is only just the top layer because the color does look a bit different underneath. Actually, the color is quite pleasant underneath. Like a curry color, actually. Citrus Kosho. So using orange, lemons, limes, and jalapeno chilies. What does that remind me of? I've had something that tastes just like that. This gives me like tom yum soup vibes with that like lime citrus freshness. Still, this is quite salty as well. So these could probably go for a bit more aging for sure. But that is actually delicious. And it doesn't really taste exactly like the other ones. The lime and the orange come through a lot stronger, but I can't deny that this is actually delicious in its own right. That would go great on chicken as well. However, if I was to do this myself, I would honestly lower the salt content. I actually have a batch which I did with 2% salt instead of 20% salt with the citrus kosho. But let's give that one a try as well. So this is my not Yuzu Kosho, which is basically just the same orange, lemon, lime, and jalapeno kosho, but with 2% salt, not 20%. Hopefully it's fermented a bit, although it's been so cold, I don't think it has really fermented. Strangely enough, the texture is different. It feels like the chilies have become more mushy in this one. I don't know if that's because of the lack of salt or it's in a vacuum bag. The texture doesn't feel the same at all in any way. It is a whole lot less salty for sure, but I think maybe it does need the salt. I guess I wasn't surprised mine was better, but the fact that I think I actually prefer the citrus kosho over the classic yuzu kosho did surprise me a bit. But I think I'm happy with that result because it ultimately means you guys can go and make this for yourself at home instead of investing a mini fortune on imported yuzu fruit or flying to Japan just to buy a small jar of it. If you enjoyed this video, consider subscribing if you haven't already. And if you have any ideas you want me to try out here, go ahead and drop them in the comments below, and I'll see you next time.